That's just the kind of God you are. It's in the empty tomb, it's on the rugged cross. Your death-defying love is written in your scars. You'll never quit on me, you'll always hold my heart, 'cause that's the kind of God you are. You gave me freedom from my sin. You told me I could start again. All the hurt is dead and gone. Now we're your daughters and your sons. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. We once were lost, but now we're found. Forever you hold us in your arms, 'cause that's just the kind of God you are. Oh, it's in the empty tomb, it's on the rugged cross. Your death-defying love is written in your scars. You'll never quit on me, you'll always hold my heart, 'cause that's the kind of God you are. You are holy, 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 high and set apart. You are holy, holy, holy. God, that's who you are. You are holy, 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 high and set apart. Holy, holy, holy. God, that's who you are. It's in the empty tomb, it's on the rugged cross. Your death-defying love is written in your scars. You'll never quit on me, you'll always hold my heart, 'cause that's the kind of God you are. It's in the empty tomb, it's on the rugged cross. Your death-defying love is written in your scars. You'll never quit on me, you'll always hold my heart, 'cause that's the kind of God you are. That's who you are. When I was young, you called my name. I tried to run, but still you came. And you stepped into the dark, 'cause that's just the kind of God you are.
All right, happy Sabbath. Looks like it's 9:30, so we're gonna get started. And last time I did this Sabbath school, I went like 15 minutes over, so I'm gonna try my best to not do that again. We're gonna start off with prayer today. I know it's a rough Sabbath for me, for a lot of us, thinking about the Matson family. So we'll start off with that. If there's any other prayer requests, let me know. But otherwise, I think that's the biggest thing to pray for at the moment, and we'll get started. Let's pray. Can you guys hear me on the mic? Okay, let's pray. Father in heaven, it's a heavy Sabbath today, and the sun is out, it's shiny, and it's beautiful, and it's summer, and yet there's a heaviness because we miss Craig so much. We just ask that you be with us as a church family. Help us to make it through this Sabbath today. Be with his family that loved him so much. and help me to make it through this lesson today. Amen. All right, I'm going to hold back. If I open the floodgates, they will not stop. Hi, buddy boy. All right, we're in Exodus today. I love the book of Exodus. I feel like as a child, trying to get into the Bible reading, my dad always was like, start with Genesis and Exodus. Those are the best, full of stories that you read as a kid. Just really fascinating, really interesting stories. And here we are in Exodus at the beginning, and we've got the story of Moses. So this is after Joseph. Joseph was kind of the reason why there are so many Hebrews living in Egypt. Hi, bud. And now we're in, 400 years later, and now we're to Moses, where life has changed for the Hebrews. They were enslaved, and Moses is like this special case. So last week, if you were here, if you were listening online, or you studied the lesson, you know that we talked about the first 40 years of Moses' life. And the first 40 years were completely spent in Egypt. And how was his life when he was young, living in Egypt? How would you describe it? Easy? Beautiful? Yeah? Comfortable? Tracy? The first part was easy. Yeah, so the first part was easy, and then the rest of it more difficult. We don't have a whole lot of verses to go off of when we come to the life of Moses. It's you have to sometimes read in between the lines. But I think that what would have been difficult for Moses in those first 40 years is the fact that he did not really fit in anywhere. He was not seen as fully Egyptian, because he wasn't. He was not seen as fully Hebrew, and we know that because the reason that he left was because he committed murder, right? And the Israelites, he committed murder against someone that was treating a Hebrew person badly, and he just came at them and killed them. And the Hebrew people knew about it, and did they appreciate Moses stepping in and his vigilante justice? No, they were like, who made you king over us? They did not respect him. They did not see him as a leader. They did not really see him as one of them. And because of the crime committed, no, you're fine, he had to run away. And so where did he go after he left Egypt? Where did he end up? Midian. Yeah, he went to the land of Midian. And so what we know about Midian is this was still an Abrahamic people. They still came from Abraham, because if we remember, Abraham had those two wives, Hagar and Sarah, but he also had a couple concubines. And so the Midianites come from one of his concubines. So they were still Abrahamic. They still had a lot of things in common with the Israelites, with the Hebrew people, but they were different. They were not quite the same. And so that's what we're going to be exploring today is Moses' life in Midian, because he spent 40 years in Egypt, and now we're going to get to the next 40 years of his life, which was his life in Midian. All right, I grew up watching the Ten Commandments. Anyone else grow up watching the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston? Is that just me? Yeah, that's like a 3-hour plus movie. Yeah. I loved that movie. We watched it a lot. And then after that, there was Prince of Egypt. I watched that a lot of Sabbaths too. Great soundtrack. If you did not ever watch Prince of Egypt, I recommend it. Well, Ten Commandments too. It's just well done. And like Hollywood is going to put their own spin on the story. And it's always, when they tell the story, Moses doesn't know about his Hebrew heritage. He doesn't know. And it's pretty clear from the Bible he did know all along. But even without that detail, the story of Moses is such a powerful and interesting story, and I just love to revisit it time and time again, because even when I was going over this, I was like, wait, did the Bible really say that? I can't tell you how many times I've read this story in the Bible, and you guys probably all have read it a bunch of times, but every time there's something new to learn. All right, so we kind of recapped Moses. I want us to turn to Exodus 3, if you got your Bible on you or your cell phone Bible on you. Exodus chapter 3 is where we're going to spend a lot of time. And verses 7 and 8 are the memory texts that the quarterly likes to focus on. Every week they got a different memory text. So Exodus chapter 3, verses 7 and 8 say, "Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites." All right. One of my favorite verses in the Bible, by the way, one of my favorite Old Testament verses. I love it because how many years have the Israelites been suffering under the hand of the Egyptians? 400 years. Okay? If I knew my history and my family was suffering for that long, I don't think at that point I'd be praying for a savior, you know? I think I would just be hurting. I would be hurting, and I would just say, this is a waste of time, I'm giving up. And there were still Hebrews that were waiting for someone to come deliver them. And God was not asleep. God was not doing nothing that whole time. He finally comes and says, it's time, I'm going to get you. So during the times where we feel like, where is God? He's there. But someone said once in a sermon, God operates at the speed of the farm. And I think that's true. You know, it doesn't feel slow to God, but to us it feels incredibly slow. We're not always going to see things in our lifetime, you know. It takes time. But God, that doesn't mean that he's not seeing what's happening. And it doesn't mean that he will one day give us the justice that we need. All right, so Moses and Midian. He is now 40 years old. When he went to Midian, first thing that we know that happened, he came across some girls in the desert that were being harassed by some other men, and he saves them. One of those girls was Zipporah, that became his wife later on. And the reason that she became his wife probably was because she was the daughter of Jethro. Jethro was like, I need to meet this Egyptian man that saved you. And they formed a good relationship, and he gave Zipporah over to him in marriage. And we don't have a great timeline of when did they get married or when did they have kids, because we always talk about when he's leaving Midian, like he's got 2 little boys. But he was there for 40 years, and he married Zipporah. I don't know, maybe he did have 2 kids later on in his life. That wouldn't have been entirely unusual, especially for these old biblical stories. Or maybe his sons were older. We don't know. There's things that we don't know that we just sort of have to guess. Jethro is the high priest of Midian. And how would we describe from what we know? Again, we have to read in between the lines. What does his life sound like while he's in Midian? Sheep keeper, yeah, he's a shepherd. Shepherd is, I'm going to say probably more stress than being a prince of Egypt, which is what he was before, but not a super stressful job. You have to protect the sheep, you have to watch them. But I'm going to say that was probably a good gig for him for a while. He gets married, he has kids, he's living a quiet life as a Midianite with his Midianite wife, their kids that are being raised up in the Midianite culture, and it's close enough to his Hebrew culture. He's probably feeling quite comfortable in life. He's not looking for a change, probably. He's not looking to do anything different. And during one of his days of being a shepherd, he sees something unusual, which was what?
The burning bush.
The burning bush, which is the title of the lesson, yeah. And I think the reason it's the title of the lesson was because that's the big thing that changes everything for Moses in these 40 years. You know, he's like 80 years old now, probably not looking to do anything big with his life. And there is a burning bush that is not burning up. And that captures his attention. And it is because God has words to tell Moses, and God had to capture Moses' attention somehow. Which also makes me think that Moses maybe wasn't actively seeking God's will, wasn't maybe actively trying to listen to God. So God needed something visual to capture him. And then God doesn't really just quietly tell him what to do. They have a full-blown conversation that we have in the Bible to look at. All right. So let's take a look. This is in the end of chapter 3, right? Not too, well, I guess we were, chapter 3. Chapter 3, the beginning of chapter 3. You read in verse 3, Moses says, I'm going to turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, this is, again, Exodus chapter 3, I'm in verse 4 now. God called him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. Then he said, do not come near, take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And then this is what God says to Moses. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And what an interesting way that God introduced himself to Moses. He's the God of Abraham, which again, Midianites also come from Abraham. Do Midianites come from Isaac or Jacob? They do not. They are not of that line. So God is specifically calling Moses in a Hebrew way. I am the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And Moses is afraid. And then he goes into this whole thing. I've seen the people and I'm sending you. And Moses says, absolutely, I've been waiting for this opportunity. I cannot wait to get started. No. Okay, what is his response to God? Does he give one excuse? Yeah.
Well, it says, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?
Yeah.
Who am I?
Who am I? Which I think, if God said, hey, there are thousands of people stuck in a country that you have no desire to go back to, I need you to go back there and free them, you would be like, me and what army? Who am I to do this? You want me to go back and do this? Why me? I'm here living my life comfortably. I'm not in Egypt. So Moses is not excited. Mm-hmm.
And he didn't leave Egypt on the best of circumstances. He killed a man and
Exactly.
had to flee.
Yes, he was like, I've committed a crime. There's no way that I want to go back. And even if you haven't committed a crime, if you've ever lived somewhere where things didn't go great, even if it was just a matter of, I don't really feel accepted here, do you want to go back and live back there? Even if it's been decades now, you still associate those memories with how you felt at that time.
That's the last place I want to go.
Yeah, the last place. You're like, I do not want to go back there. I am happy in my new life. I am so glad that I'm living this new life over here. I'm comfortable. I've got a family. Why am I going back? And who am I to do this? Now, what does God say when Moses says, who am I? What was God's response to Moses? Yeah.
I was going to say,
Oh, go ahead.
sometimes Moses could even say, thank you. And God didn't call him at his, when he was in his prime time, 50, 40, 45. But he waited till Moses was 80.
Yeah.
And Moses was like, okay, who am I? I'm 80 years old. I'm just an old man.
Yeah.
I don't have the strength to lead an army. Sometimes
Exactly.
it could be thinking that.
Yeah. Moses left Egypt when he was 40, which is almost my age. I'm getting very close to there. And he was not a good leader at 40, right? The people rejected him. The Egyptians did not see him as, he was a prince of Egypt, but he's not like an important prince. The Israelites did not see him as anyone important either. He's like, I don't have these leadership skills. This is not me. There's so many reasons that I can list why this is not me. And God says, I'm sending you. And God's response to Moses is, I am that I am, or literally, I will be that I will be. And so God isn't saying, oh, Moses, let me give you a long list of all these reasons why you were qualified to do the job. None of that, which would have been really nice. If I was in Moses' situation, I would be like, start listing things why you think I'm qualified. I don't mind a compliment. God doesn't do that. God just says, I am that I am. What does that mean? Why would God have responded in that way rather than listing off, Moses, you've got this great trait and this one and that one and that one?
It's not about you.
It's not about me. Yeah, it's not about Moses. It's not about me. Yes.
He has spent 40 years under the school of Egypt, but then he spent 40 years in the desert tending sheep. So God's education might be very different from worldly education. So there are many valuable lessons that I'm sure he learned taking care of sheep
Yeah.
in the desert. Patience, tending to them, feeding them, protecting them from danger. There's a lot of lessons that he probably didn't realize that God was teaching him in the desert.
Yeah, I agree. That was his desert school with the sheep. And I think one of the biggest things he might have learned also was humility. I don't know how humble he was being set apart as a separate Hebrew from the rest. You know, I was this baby that survived a massacre. I was chosen by an Egyptian princess to be raised as her son. I am this special person. I don't know how humble he would have been living in Egypt. I think maybe he might have felt like, I do deserve to be a leader. And that's why he was a little bit of a vigilante at the end, where he said, I can murder this guy. And his heart was in the right place, right? He saw someone being hurt and he went to avenge someone. That's not necessarily bad, but he murdered someone. That is bad. So, like, you can have good intentions, but you're doing things the wrong way. And those 40 years in the desert, I think he had to unlearn a lot of things and relearn who God was. And I still think it's really cool that he ended up with the Midianites, with people that could still teach him about who his God was, even though they were a little bit different than his own people. Yeah.
I think earlier you said that he was not searching, but I believe that he was searching. The fact that he killed someone, maybe he was soul searching, see if he could have forgiveness for what he's done in the past.
Okay.
So the fact that God appeared to him as a burning bush, I believe that he humbled himself to the point where he was searching. So that's why God, the Bible says, if you search, you find. He found that burning bush, and that's when God appeared to him at the moment where he was really wanting some sort of sign in his life, some sort of direction, and that's when I feel like God approached him.
Yeah, that definitely could have been. I mean, and also, like, he was like, I want to go see what this is all about. He could have just been like, there's a bush on fire over there, and I don't know, maybe he would have had a lack of curiosity, but he was curious. Yes?
I'd like to point, though, that how God answered him when he said, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? God simply answered by saying to him, I certainly will be with you. And what God said to Moses then, he's saying to us too.
Yes.
That he will be with us all the time. That's why he said, go, preach the gospel. Mm-hmm. I will never leave you or forsake you. I'm going to be there with you.
Yeah.
And so we should remember these words as comforting words to us today too.
I love that. And I love that we have in the Bible, thousands of years after Moses, Jesus is calling his 12 disciples. He says, come follow me. He doesn't say, here's a list of qualifications I have for my disciples, and if I can tick these boxes off, you get to be a disciple of mine. He calls people that are like very largely unqualified to be the student of a rabbi, and he's like, yeah, I want you. And that's who God is. He says it's not about your skills, although he does give us skills that we need. He did, the skills that he learned in Egypt and the skills that he learned as a shepherd were going to come in handy for Moses for the next 40 years of his life. But he doesn't say, I need you to be qualified before I send you. He says, I will be with you when you're doing this job, whether or not you're qualified or not. And he can help us become qualified for the job, not trusting in our own skills, but because God is going to be there with us to give us what we need. So I really love that about, God is not there to say, okay, Moses, here's all your positive qualities. He just says, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to be with you. And Moses is still not convinced, right? Moses has still further complaints, further excuses of why God has chosen the wrong guy. And if we think to ourselves, wow, that's pretty brazen of Moses to do that, I still think I would have been a lot like Moses. If I'd been asked to do a very difficult task, I would have been like, God, are you sure? I mean, I know you're God, but are you really sure you know what you're doing? And yeah, go ahead.
I still do that today.
Right, yeah, we still do that today. So yeah, Moses says, who am I to do this?
That means then
Go ahead, Floyd.
For Moses, it was that burning bush. But we all have our individual burning bushes.
Yeah.
You know, God got his attention through that. And when we look and reflect on our lives, we realize we had a burning bush too.
Yes.
There are some very peculiar ways God tried to get our attention and is still trying to get our attention.
Yes, yeah, I agree. Even if we don't see something that defies the laws of physics, we have these instances in our lives where you're like, that really did not make sense for that to have happened at that time. And I know that was God speaking to me. Or I shouldn't have felt that way at that time. I feel like that must have been God speaking to me.
We should be like Moses. I should go look at this.
Yes, yeah, we should be curious. Be curious. Moses also asked God in that chapter, he says, what is your name? Which is interesting because God just introduced himself. I am the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses wants to know God's name because God doesn't really have a name, right? We call him Lord, we call him Yahweh, we call him God, but that's not an actual name, right? So Moses is curious. He wants to know more about this person that he is, this God, this being that he's following. And that's when God says, I am that I am, or I will be who I will be, which is not still an answer. You know, it's not a name, but it does speak to who God is. And Moses says, okay, well, what if they don't believe me? What if they're not going to, which I would, again, why are you sending me back there? What if they don't believe me? Then what does God say to Moses? What do you have in your hand? So now God's getting real technical, right? God's not just speaking in grand things of, well, I'm going to be with you, just go. Moses wants to know the little details. How are these people are not going to listen to me. I'm pretty sure I already know this. How are they going to do this? And God says, what do you have in your hand, Moses? And he does the two signs. Anyone know what the two signs? I'm sure we all do. The two signs were one of the staff turning into a snake.
And turning back into a staff.
Yeah.
And the second one was with his cloak.
Yes.
And he put his hand in, would turn the leprosy, put it back in, and put it back out.
Right. So yeah, two very interesting, again, defying the laws of physics here. Moses' staff, his shepherd staff, that who knows how many years he's been using it, could have been all 40 years of his life as a shepherd, throws it on the ground and it turns into a snake. That's pretty convincing that the God that has called you is very powerful. And then he says, put your hand in your cloak, comes out leprous, which would have been terrifying. That's the worst, one of the worst diseases to have had back then. Put it back in and he's fine. And then at that point, Moses says, okay, I'm convinced, I'm happy to do your work. No. No, Moses is still, he has cold feet. He does not want to do that. He says, I am not eloquent in speech. Some people say Moses had a stutter. Some people say Moses just wasn't fluent. It doesn't really matter to me what the excuse is. He is relatable because how many of us are great at public speaking? That's a big fear for a lot of people. And he's got to go all the way up to the highest person in the land, a pharaoh that he doesn't know, and say, I need you to let all these slaves that you own, you need to let them go. Moses saying, I do not know how to deliver these speeches. I cannot do this. I don't have that gift. And God says to Moses,
He said his brother Aaron with him to speak on his behalf.
yeah, well, first, before I even mention Aaron, God says, I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you speak. I will be there to help you. And Moses is like, that's not good enough. Which imagine telling God, God's like, don't worry, I'll help you with this. And you're like, no, God, no.
See, God has a solution for every problem.
Yes, God has a solution for every problem.
God has a solution.
Yes, because at that point, Moses says, nope, please send somebody else. God doesn't even take no for an answer. I think God would have taken no for an answer if Moses really had put his foot down because he accepts our free choice. But here you can tell God is like, no, I really have this in design for you. Aaron is coming on his way, and he can help you speak, okay? So he's really like, let's take baby steps here, Moses. We can do this. Ellen?
I also feel like Moses he's not putting his full faith in God.
Mm-hmm.
And so God is saying, okay, well, since you don't feel that I can use you, since you don't feel I can use you alone, then now you're going to have to share this power with someone, right? So it's more if a teacher in the classroom, is up there teaching and they say, well, I can't teach these 3-year-olds because they're not, or 12-year-olds because they're not listening. And then having a second teacher come in, now you have 2 separate teachers who have 2 separate lesson plans, and you're all trying to teach the same thing, but neither of them are truly the full leader because they're not listening to the principal, say,
Right.
God was trying to use Moses and all of his his weaknesses to show how strong God is.
Mm-hmm.
And because Moses was saying, no, I still don't believe you're that strong, basically, God was like, okay, well, here's a crutch that you can use because here's your blankie.
Yes.
Here's your blankie so that you can trust me better.
Yes.
And because of that, it was throughout the whole time he was in Egypt, his brother was the one that was actually saying God's words. God told Moses, and Moses told Aaron, and Aaron told them. And I feel like that can kind of dilute a little bit of God's power.
Yeah. And yeah, to your point of Moses needing a crutch, it is sometimes your way of saying, like, I don't really trust God fully, right? But thank God that he lets us use the crutches that we need, because none of us have that perfect faith. And how amazing is it that Moses at 80 years old did not have that perfect faith, said, I really need help to do this job and I don't want to do it. And God says, here's Aaron. He gave him that crutch that he needed. I think all throughout my life, I've probably needed several crutches to make it through my spiritual life. And God did not come down and say, you know what, your faith is a little bit diminished because you need this crutch. He lets us use what we need until our faith can become more mature and more mature. And imagine once we're in heaven, we're like, whoa, I was using all kinds of things I didn't actually need. But thank God that he let us use what we can to get through these times. They're difficult times. Floyd, yeah? Okay.
You're going to look at Moses as a human. And he's being asked to go back to Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And any of us in that situation remember, Lord have mercy. You asked me to go to Egypt, I killed a man there.
Yeah.
So Moses, I think the humanity's come out there. He said, who am I to go back? Mm-hmm. And God reminds him, look, I'm going to go with you. But I think it also is a lesson for us, is that God, we may have messed up. And the devil is there trying to remind us all the time of that messing up.
Yeah.
And even have us get to the point where we question, can I really be used by God? And God is saying, I'm going with you.
Mm-hmm.
But the humanity, that human thing's still coming in. And so I see Moses, this year, all these questions. Moses is thinking about that, all these questions. God provides excuses. God provides the solutions. And then when he can't think about anything else, he says, send somebody else.
Yeah, yeah.
And this tells us, look, we may have messed up, but God can still use us, and we should be willing to allow God to use us.
Yeah, I like that. I like how you put that. That's so true. Yeah, God even tells Moses, oh, offering's coming around, so we've got baskets back there for Star and Kathy. God even tells Moses, the Pharaoh that knew about your crimes and everything, that Pharaoh's gone. Like he lets Moses know before he's even left that guy's gone. He also tells Moses, let's see. He tells Moses about the blood that's going to happen in the Nile. And then he tells Moses that babies are going to die. That Pharaoh's son is going to die because of all of this. Like he lets Moses know up front, here's some bad things that are going to happen during this process. And that Pharaoh's going to be really stubborn. Okay, that's all in chapter 4, verse 21 through 23. So Moses kind of knows what he's getting himself into. He's letting him know about the difficulties that are coming. And I think that's interesting because God does not always give us a heads up on those things, but he's letting Moses know in advance. Yeah, there's a comment.
Yeah, just so you can get an idea of how scary the situation was. Some scholars have drawn the comparison between the papal system, which is God on earth, basically the Pope, and the Pharaoh, because he was divine. He was supposed to be God on earth. So it's like right now one of us going up to the Pope and saying, "Let my people go."
Right. Yeah.
Babylon. It's basically kind of what the SDAs are doing. And in a way, we're kind of like Moses, but we're not quite there yet. Where he probably still has us in the wilderness right now. But I believe that we will get to that point where the SDAs will be heard, and then that's when they will ask for our head.
Yeah, I'm always careful how I talk about Catholicism because I know some wonderful Catholics out there that love Jesus with all their heart, and I'm not convinced that that just because I'm Adventist, I'm better than a Catholic. But if we think about modern day religious leaders, going to Pharaoh would be like going to a pope, and who am I to go? Why would the Pope even let me come into the Vatican and have a meeting with him? That's ridiculous to assume that. So yes, it's very similar along those lines of excuse me, why me? So God tells him, hey, all of these difficult things are going to happen. I'm going to be with you. Your brother Aaron is coming. Moses goes and talks to Jethro, his father-in-law. He says, God asked me to do this thing. Jethro's like, okay. And you take your wife and you take your kids and you guys, you've got my blessing to go. So everything's good, everything's positive, and everything's hunky-dory on the way to Egypt, right? No. We have a very bizarre story, the circumcision story, that just seems completely out of place because we just had an amazing experience, God speaking to Moses, directly to Moses, I have a job for you. You're going to go do this job. I have chosen you to go do this. You're going to get some help along the way. And then this bizarre story where it sounds like God is suddenly trying to kill Moses because of something that we're not sure, but Zipporah knows. Zipporah knows what's going on. And she comes to the rescue, and she circumcises one of the sons, and then, says, what does she say? A bridegroom of blood. Surely you're a bridegroom of blood to me. And everything's resolved. And then we're reading the story in the Bible, and we're like, what? What is this? This is so bizarre. This is strange. And biblical scholars do not have a conclusive idea of exactly what this means. There's no one that's out there that says, oh yeah, these few verses here, 2 or 3 verses here, that have this. I know what this means. There's a lot that we have to read into the text to try to make meaning out of it. I feel like you could talk about how early Bible days, they did not have a concept of Satan. They did not have a concept of what that was, and that's why you read verses like God hardened the heart of Pharaoh or God did this thing. They applied the good and the bad to all coming from God. Our understanding of God today is a little bit different than that. We understand that God is the source of good things and that Satan is the reason why we have bad things happen. But we don't go around saying, this terrible thing happened because of God. Some people do still. But for the most part, we know better than that. We have a more nuanced view of God. So it could be that wasn't God trying to kill Moses? Perhaps it was the devil trying to attack his work. But other people say, no, it probably was God because Moses failed to do something very important. I cannot say definitively which is the correct answer, and I don't think it is super important because the Bible would have spelled it out if it were super important for us to know for sure. But Moses did fail to do something as an Israelite, which was circumcision, right? Did you want to? I'm happy to have you comment. Go ahead.
I think I remember reading in the lesson in the Spirit of Prophecy where initially Ellen White speaks to the fact that Zipporah was against circumcising the child in the beginning, and that's why she knew. So she had been the reason why she had told Moses, I don't want to do this thing, and Moses had not done it because of what she had done and, her reaction. And so that's why when she knew that her husband was going to die, she went ahead and did it.
Yeah, which is a pretty amazing story for Zipporah. And a lot of scholars would agree with, we don't have these, any circumcision rules written down from the Midianites. We don't have a lot of stuff written down from the Midianites. There's things that we don't know. So it's did they require circumcision or did they not? Because, again, they are Abrahamic tradition. But either way, if they did, one of their sons did not get circumcised. And was it because of Zipporah? That's what Spirit of Prophecy says. But we don't have anything in the Bible that specifically says why. But something that I do like about that version of the story is when Moses first came to the land of Midian, he had to rescue somebody. Who did he rescue? Zipporah. And then we come back to this story where Zipporah knows exactly what to do. Moses is unable to function. A lot of people think when he was being killed, he was rendered useless in some way. So Zipporah knows what to do, and then Zipporah comes to Moses' rescue. So it's sort of like two different sides of the coin. They're helping each other out. Yeah, Floyd.
When you look at this same story here, I think the lesson brings it out. I don't think there's any reason to wonder. The fact is that this was a requirement. And it's really interesting that I see look at it from another angle. Moses is desirous and he's going to do God's work. But at the same time, he neglects to do something that he should have done.
Yeah.
And the lesson brings an important lesson can be learned from this episode. Never fail to do what we know is right. Mm-hmm. And that was the thing that was there. He had failed to comply with the condition by which his child should be entitled to the blessings of God's covenant with Israel. So there's no excuse for not doing what is right. The other thing that you mentioned that is, and somebody asked me about this during the week too, hardening of Pharaoh's heart. God did not harden Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh, by completely ignoring the light and the truth that was being sent to him, mm-hmm. by continuing to fail to follow God, every time he disobeyed God, he was actually hardening his own heart.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, that's another good way to look at that. Yeah, I think that there is a lesson there. In James it says, let not many of you become teachers, for with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. There is a higher standard for people that are in leadership positions, because if you are in a position of power over people, that can be good or bad, right? You could use that to abuse, you could use that to mislead, and that's dangerous. And it is good to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row before you become somebody that could be a powerful figure in a community. And Moses, by not having his son circumcised, if the Hebrew people knew about that, would they have respect for Moses? No, he would have been seen as someone very, very bad. And so even if, which we know circumcision was extremely important until for some reason we get to Paul and they sort of let it go a little bit, which is shocking to me. But it was extremely important. Every male had to be circumcised. If you're going to go do mission work in a different country, in a different culture, and they are doing things that you think, this isn't really even biblical, but in order to speak to these people, I have to be a little bit like them, that's another opportunity where you could say, I'm going to have to change my lifestyle a little bit in order to live like these people. So there's pockets of Adventism, but I don't wear much jewelry. And I always knew I was going to be an Adventist teacher, and I never got my ears pierced because of that. It's just a thing. And we kind of live, especially in the Pacific Northwest, it's not as important up here, but I changed my lifestyle knowing the kind of people that I would be working with and deciding this is how I'm going to live my life. When I was a student missionary in Honduras, I changed the clothes I was going to be wearing because certain clothes were seen as scandalous, and I'm a missionary, even though I can wear a pair of shorts, and I think that's not scandalous. If they see that as scandalous, how good is my mission work going to be? Not good. So if Moses goes and his son is not circumcised, and that is not meeting the requirements that God has for the Israelite people, not only is he out of step and out of tune with what God wanted him to do, the Israelite people are not going to be as receptive to his leadership because he is not in line. And so it is a bit unfair that we hold up leaders to a higher standard sometimes, but it also makes a lot of sense. Your leaders should be held up to a greater standard because they have to lead people to the truth, and because there is a very negative impact to being a leader and letting bad things come in. All right, so.
Got one comment on the side.
Oh, go ahead. Yes, Helen. We've just got a couple minutes left, Ellen, so just letting you know.
So I was just thinking about how Moses is a type to Jesus, and it was if it was Zipporah who had not liked the idea of her children or her son being circumcised, it was her sin that Moses was being punished for.
That's true.
So it could also just be another lesson and another pointing towards Christ, saying, yes, you are making this choice, but I am the one that's going to suffer for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our sins hurt people. Our seemingly innocent-ish sins can hurt other people in ways we don't realize. So she knew it right away. So she must have already, something was tickling her conscience there. We're going to get ready to close. Mm-hmm.
Therefore, regardless of her making,
Yeah.
it was his responsibility to see that happen.
Yeah. And there's so much, I encourage you, go online and read all of the different takes on the story because they're fascinating. No matter where you decide to land on it, it's just absolutely fascinating. And there's only a couple of verses we have to go off of it. I'm gonna land the plane here with just a couple of reflections I'm gonna pass out, but we're not gonna have time to answer them. The burning bush was really important. How did Moses' encounter with God make him a good leader and a new person? So how did that whole burning bush just change him to be a good leader and a new person? It didn't happen like that, but it definitely was the catalyst that Moses needed to enter the next phase of his life, which was very exciting and very stress-filled. So he needed to do a lot of changes in his life to be ready for that. Let's end with prayer. Father in heaven, thank you so much for these stories that we have in the Bible, for these stories that we have in Genesis and Exodus. They're so fascinating to see how these patriarchs of the faith lived. We thank you for Moses and the example that he's given us, and we thank you that we have confusing texts in the Bible that we can grapple with because we always learn something new about you as we wrestle with these texts. We ask that you be with our church service today in a special way. Wrap your arms of comfort around all of us that are hurting. Thank you for the leaders that we have around us that are like Moses, that are leaders because they're humble, because they follow you, and not because of their own skills. And God, we also, again, want to lift up the Matson family to you, God, and that you just be with them in a very special way. Comfort them and